I've got another one. Another classic Western, actually. More of a cult Western. It's from one of my favorite directors, Samuel Fuller. He is, I think, the quintessential cult filmmaker from the classic Hollywood era. You have to talk about the legend of who he is before you even talk about his movies. He's one of those ones like Werner Herzog is just so larger than life and led this incredibly storied life that became a part of the movies that he made. He was a newspaper man by the time he was a teenager. He reported on violent crimes. He traveled the world by train, saw the effects of the Great Depression firsthand. He met Al Capone in a bar in Chicago.
And was scared shitless, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
He moved to Hollywood, became a writer, started publishing Pulp Fiction, started becoming a screenwriter. World War II breaks out. He enlists, becomes a Marine, fights in almost the entire length of the war, serves in the unit The Big Red One, which became famous, and he later turned into a famous autobiographical film very late in his life in the 1980s. Stormed the beach at Normandy on D-Day, was shot through the chest, survived, was awarded a Purple Heart, came back to Hollywood, and established this maverick career where he was working inside the studio system, but basically working with complete autonomy. And same as Preston Sturges, who we talked about last week, he was one of the first writer-directors to work within the studio system and to put a very distinct stamp on all of his movies. And the one I want to mention is his first film, I Shot Jesse James.
Is that the one we saw recently?
That's the one we watched, yeah, a couple days ago. Didn't care for that one so much.
Said I don't like ones that lionize Jesse James, and in that movie Jesse James was a paragon of humanity.
That's true. It's a movie that plays fast and loose with the historical facts. What makes I Shot Jesse James so interesting is the way it reinterprets one of the famous stories of the mythological Wild West, the shooting of Jesse James by Robert Ford, which is also the subject of a great Western by Andrew Dominik, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I think one of the best films and one of the best Westerns of this century so far. And I think a lot of what Dominik does in that movie and the way he approaches the story and the themes he explores and the complexity of the relationship between these two men is first established by Samuel Fuller in I Shot Jesse James. It's a movie that, since it was made in 1949, it has to mask a lot of what's going on.
But they're fucking.
It's true, yeah. It's a movie about a man in love with another man who can't admit his love for that man.
There is a very erotic bathtub.
It's true, and I think that scene is directly referenced by a scene in Andrew Dominik's movie with Robert Ford in a bathtub. And there's actually another quotation. There's a scene with a musician after the assassination where a musician is playing a folk song about the coward Robert Ford.
Which is catchy.
Yeah. He walks into a bar and the actual Ford is there and is like, "What's that song you're singing? I'm Robert Ford." And he makes the guy sing the whole song to his face. And the poor guy's just sweating bullets as he does it.
Well, he gives him a coin or something and is like, "Play something." And he's like, yeah. "Okay, I'll play one of everybody's favorites." Yeah. Fuck Robert Ford. And then him halfway through the song, he's like, "I'm Robert Ford."
Yeah. And that's also quoted in the Dominik movie with a scene where a musician shows up singing a very similar song.
I was gonna say I remembered that from the Andrew Dominik movie of Nick Cave singing the song in that scene. Yeah. So I think that shows you like how that's a very direct way of seeing how the Western is in dialogue with itself, even between a movie made in 1949 and a movie made in 2008. But yeah, it has to mask Robert Ford, his true motivations behind a lot of other things, because you couldn't really fully say what this movie was about in 1949. So, he has a woman that he's in love with and he's trying to get married to her. And the motivation on the surface is that he kills Jesse James for the reward money and to be pardoned so that he can start a life with this woman. But it doesn't really work out that way. She's kind of horrified by his actions. And he's sort of surprised by the fact that he is vilified by
doing this thing that he did. And I've heard this movie described sometimes as the first psychological Western. And I think the way I interpret that is it's a movie that's not stating the true intention of what's driving the character. So he becomes very unpredictable and very suspenseful, and he's constantly tense and he's constantly on edge, and you constantly don't know what he's going to do. And everyone's sort of off guard with him. And it comes from the fact that he's not able to admit that he's actually in love with Jesse James and is tortured by the fact that he killed the man he loved. That's what's really going on. And yes, there is a very cheeky bathtub scene where Jesse James is like,
come wash my back, Robert.
Come wash my back, Robert.
And when you're done, come around to the front.
Which, why don't you wash my back? That's as close as you could come to showing two men having sex in a 1949 film.
But we know it happened.
Yeah. So
in a time when like a married couple couldn't even sleep in the same bed in a movie.
Yeah,
I'm sure they had to be
across the divide.
But it's very clear what's actually going on, that all of that is built into the subtext of the movie, and it just can't really say it. So it gives this movie an unusual intensity that was really not like what people had seen in the Western up to that point. One of the people who saw it and who was left with a very deep impression was a young Martin Scorsese, who said just that.
Oh.
He remembered the tension of that movie, the intensity of the character, and just not knowing what he was going to do next. And he's never stated its influence on his movies, but I feel like you could see the way the character is presented in I Shot Jesse James. You can see how that impacted something like Taxi Driver, because that character, Travis Bickle, is sort of the same thing. The way I put it is, you can call back to the famous Hitchcock phrase where he said, action is a bomb going off, suspense is a bomb not going off. I think you can apply the same thing to a character. What makes a character suspenseful and tense is when they're like a bomb that doesn't go off, and that violence and that tension is lurking under the surface. And that's really what Samuel Fuller does in I Shot Jesse James. And what makes that movie so interesting is that it gives a take on a cowboy character that had never really been done before. And I think it makes for a great double feature with Dominik's Assassination of Jesse James, because you can see, I don't know if Dominik has explicitly stated that he was building off of I Shot Jesse James, but it's unmistakable. He's very clearly building on and expanding the ideas that Fuller establishes in his movie like 60 years before.
Is Dominik the guy who did Blonde?
Yes, that's him.
Yes. Oh, all right.
Yeah, he's only made a few movies. Each one is pretty different from the last. But I'm really interested in checking that out because I'm a big fan of Assassination of Jesse James. Or I think I saw Tyler refer to it as Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward. It's a really long title. Yeah. They insisted on that long title, apparently. The one that can't fit on a marquee. But I'm a big fan of that one, and am really interested in seeing a different take on it, but starting that kind of conversation of that, of looking at that dynamic between Robert Ford and Jesse James. It's so particular and fascinating, and what I loved about the Andrew Dominik movie was how it sort of anticipates celebrity obsession with somebody like Robert Ford hearing about the myth of Jesse James and kind of falling in love with somebody the way we would fall in love with celebrities now, of like, they're everything I want to be, they're so cool, I want to be with them all the time, they'd be my best friend, and
developing this parasocial relationship.
Yeah
exactly, of it's so fascinating to see something that's so prescient to our times, but like done in a Western setting of that kind of idolizing, and it's beautifully done in that movie. I really love that dynamic, but it sounds like it kind of really started in that Samuel Fuller movie. So interesting. I'd really love to check that out.